Awesome. Ariel, welcome to the show. Super psyched to have you on, man.
Yeah, likewise. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, be super cool. So this is in the series of kind of blockchain meets meatspace, the real world, what most people think of as a real world. And we'll get into what Hivemapper does, but I'd like to start with you. I know you came from kind of mapping a little bit background search over at Yahoo. Can you talk me through, how did you end up being where you are right now?
Sure. So way back when I was in Yahoo search, and within Yahoo search was the Yahoo Maps team. And so I'd always loved maps, but never really understood how they were built at scale, and then never understood the business of them. And then I didn't really quite appreciate just how frequently they were used by people, right? If you think about like every day as we go about our world, we touch maps in some form or fashion, whether it be through a travel application, a social application, real estate, travel, you name it, beyond just using Google Maps every day or Apple Maps or whatever your choice of maps is. We just use maps a ton. Uber, obviously wouldn't exist without maps. Lyft wouldn't exist without maps and geolocation and so forth. And so it's embedded in our lives in a way that, most people don't like pause and appreciate, I think most days. And that's fine. That's good. I mean, that means it's like useful and it's kind of boring from a certain perspective. So at Yahoo, we were fighting against Google at that time. And, it was still kind of neck and neck when I was there. So this goes back like 2005, 6, 7. And so what I was watching was basically Google Maps was investing massive amounts of money collecting this data, and we were not. And that obviously took a while for it to bore out in terms of from a competitive perspective. But look, they kicked our ass, and that did not feel good.
Right.
And so being a fairly competitive person, I was like, geez. Look, they spent billions of dollars collecting this data, right? They're also now hooked into your Android device, so they're collecting data that way.
Yep.
And so I said, geez, there must be a much more cost-effective way to build out a global map. And so I left Yahoo, started a company, first company, it's called gigwalk. Mm-hmm. And it was really this idea of, how do you turn all these iPhone and Android devices into a mechanism or a cost-effective mechanism to collect data? That grew. There are a couple million users all over the world collecting data with our Android device and our iPhone device. It ended up being like a really great data collection service for like CPG companies and so forth, but it was never going to be.
Hang on a second. Let's just stop because not everyone understands all the jargon. Tell me what CPG is.
Oh, sorry. Consumer product goods company. So that would be like Procter and Gamble, right? So Procter and Gamble would say, okay, geez, we need to be able to go in and understand, how our products are being displayed at all these different stores all over the world, right? Or World Health Organization would say, hey, we'd like to understand, this piece of data across all of these different locations all over the world. And so you had this like iPhone, Android army of like data collectors that would go collect this data on their behalf, right? Or even like Bloomberg would be like, hey, what's the price of tomatoes, right? Like commodity prices in all these different parts of the world. We grew that. It was a nice business, but it was never going to be massive.
I mean, you would think that'd be amazingly big because I'm just taking from the name Gig Walk. You're just paying people to walk around and map something. Is that? That's like in a nutshell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. It was like the cost. Okay, so a couple things on this. Now we're getting deep into this, which I think is potentially interesting. Which is every customer was a snowflake, right? So it was like, okay, I want this piece of data, collected in this way from this time frame in these locations, customer. So it became very project oriented. And so it made it very, very, very hard to like scale. And because every customer wanted something different. And then gigwalk did not actually own any of the data, right? And so we couldn't then turn around and like license the data to a different customer because customer A would come to us and say, I want this piece of data. Customer B would come to us and say, I want this data. And it was their own data, right? It was like they paid
they were paying you to collect their data, but you never own the data.
Yeah, we didn't own the data. We provide some analytics and software and stuff like that where they could, come into a portal and analyze the data in a whole bunch of different ways. I'll never forget, there was this woman in Minnesota at one of these consumer product goods companies, and she thought the whole thing was like, just total bullshit. She's like, but she was like amazed by it, and she had budget. So she had, I don't remember, it was like $50,000 or $75,000. And she said to me, just to give you a little bit of context, we're like, hey, you have to download Chrome because like our product didn't work on IE, which was what she was using. Mm-hmm. And she's like, is this spam? So
right.
We're like, no, it's not spam.
Yeah.
So she wrote us a check for $50,000 or $75,000. And she's like, this is the last I'm going to see of this money. She thought it was like total, and so then she went away for the weekend. She came back and like basically her entire dashboard was full of this data. She like couldn't believe it. So it was pretty cool, right? Like you saw the power of it,
yep.
But from a business perspective and just the number of customers that were kind of out there, it wasn't going to be like a massive, very, very large business. So I stepped away from that and was still kind of on this like, this feeling of like, how do you build out a global map that can really truly scale the entire world?
Hang on a second, Ariel. And I'm saying that right, yeah? Ariel,
yeah.
Ariel, I want to pause there and just talk about kind of one of the fundamental pieces here, which you said early on, but I want to dig into, is that mapping is a business. I don't think most of us think of mapping as a business. We think of mapping as maybe a utility for us, not realizing that it's a business for someone else. So yeah, can you walk me through like how do people make money off of maps?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of primary ways. So one is, Google Maps, obviously, folks like you and I use it to just, get driving directions and, search places and so forth. Google and others monetize our data effectively via ads, right? And so that's kind of one primary way in which most people are pretty familiar with.
Yep.
But then there's all these other businesses that then hook into the Google Maps API or other APIs from like Mapbox and other great companies, and they then embed maps in a whole variety of ways into their own application. And every time you as a business are hitting an API, so you want driving directions, right? You're a transportation logistics company and you're doing routing, whatever it may be, you're hitting the driving directions API, and then boom, you're basically just incurring a cost or a fee every single time you hit the driving directions API. And you're paying for that. So for example, when Uber went public, I think they published this data, so it is public data. I think they were paying roughly $20 or $25 million a year to Google Maps to use the Google Maps API product, right? So every time the Google Maps product got loaded into the Uber app across all their users, they were paying Google Maps $20 or $25 million. Somebody can go check that. I don't remember the exact number.
It was a lot of money. Yeah.
It was meaningful, right?
Yep.
And so that's a very, very large business, right? So if you have, I think Google Maps has publicized, they have roughly 4 or 5 million developers that are using the Google Maps API. Most of those customers are paying for it because the free tier is very, very, very limited in what you can actually do, right?
Okay, so like you or I as a customer we're I guess technically pulling from the API, but we're doing it 5 times a day or something, or every time we go from one place to another. Is that correct, or that's not correct?
So if you're using the Google Maps product, obviously you and I are not paying, but yes, if you're using Uber or if you're using Zillow or if you're using if you're a delivery guy working at FedEx, you're using some sort of mapping application, right? Or if you're on Zillow moving around, every single time you're using their map, behind the scenes, they're hitting a Google Maps API or another mapping API company, and Zillow is then incurring a cost associated with that.
Okay.
So that kind of mapping infrastructure, sits across literally millions upon millions and millions of developers. And that as you and I use all those various applications, those companies are effectively incurring a fee to some, whether it be Google Maps or Mapbox or whatever, to then use all that mapping infrastructure.
Okay. So this is, if we back way out, this is yet another example of this kind of blockchain meets meatspace place where there are these giant and very and valuable data flows all around us. It's as if we're walking through a bunch of different rivers, and the normal consumer doesn't see any of those rivers, doesn't even get wet, right? But they're all around us. There's a giant flow of data that is super valuable that's being used. And this is kind of where I think Hivemapper starts to come into the equation, is that you saw something like this, and you're like, I think we can change where some of that value goes. Is that right? Or did you think of it in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, it took us a while to kind of get all the ingredients right, and we can talk more about that, right?
Yeah.
But the critical thing is, when you're building a map, the world is a very, very, very large place, a very, very complicated place. It's constantly changing, and so the key is, unless you're Google or Apple, and you're willing to throw billions upon billions of dollars to go out and collect this data, and then manage the data and then constantly keep it up to date. It's really, really, really tough to go out and build a truly global map that is high quality, that is fresh, and so forth, right? So if you take a step back and you say, okay, what are the various approaches that have been tried and executed well to actually building out a global map? There's what I refer to as the Google Map approach. And now Apple Maps has effectively done a version of that, right? Mm-hmm. Which is, they have the capital, God bless them. They can go and invest in their own, vehicles and airplanes and so forth to go collect this data and then go keep it up to date and so forth. Look, Apple Maps has dramatically improved over the last 10 years, but I would argue, I think it's pretty well known and established that, they've done a really nice job in the US and certain markets in Europe and so forth, but, Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, they haven't yet got to most of those markets, right? And so, but that's one approach. The other approach is you can take what is executed, basically the crowdsourcing approach, right? And so you have this product out there, which is phenomenal, which is called OpenStreetMap. And it is effectively like the Wikipedia of maps, right? And so you have a set of editors. They go into this tool online and they're basically drawing roads, they're drawing buildings, they're annotating the names of roads and addresses. And so you now have a couple million contributors who over the last 16, 17 years have built out something which is actually, quite good from a map perspective, right?
Sure. Where does that data get hosted, the OpenStreetMap stuff?
It's a foundation. So the OpenStreetMap Foundation gets support from various corporate sponsors.
But where do they store the information? Is it on like AWS servers, or is it?
Yeah, I think I don't know for sure, but yes, it's probably on some sort of AWS server. Cool. It's actually not a massive amount of data because there's a variety of reasons for that. I won't go into all the details, but the editors, the people who've contributed to that product. So the OpenStreetMap data, for a second, has actually been made its way into a lot of different products, right? Probably hundreds of millions of users are using OpenStreetMap data every single day, maybe even probably billions of users at this point, unbeknownst to them, right? But all those, like, now you have companies like Amazon, like Apple, like, Grab Taxi, many companies are using OpenStreetMap data. And it's all free. Right.
They're using it because it's cheaper than what's free. It's cheaper than Google or cheaper than anything else out there.
It's entirely free. Right. And so, look, if you're an editor and you're saying to yourself, look, I've poured in, hundreds, if not thousands of hours of my life into this map, all these companies get to use it for free. I don't know how well that sits with some of them. Right. This idea that,
it wouldn't hurt to throw a couple pennies
Amazon,
my way. Yeah.
What's that?
It wouldn't hurt to throw a couple pennies their way, for sure.
Yeah, Amazon is worth, I don't know, a couple $1 trillion. They don't pay a cent, right, to OpenStreetMap for the use of the data. So that's another approach, right? It takes a long, long time to do it, right? The third approach is you can pay people, right? You can literally just pay them cash to go do it, and we did that, quite frankly, and we continue to kind of do that. The problem with that is that the relationship between, let's call it, the company that's collecting the data and the contributors becomes very adversarial, right? Why? Because the company's objective is to make profits, right? And increase profits. So let's say you pay, 10 cents per tile. Okay.
How big is a tile?
What's that?
How big is a tile?
A tile is pretty small. It's about 8 feet wide in our system. Yeah. Very small.
Like an 8 by 8 foot section.
Yeah, it's a hex. So the longest distance is about 8.8 feet. So there's some reasons as to why they're so small. But let's say you pay like half a penny each, right? You know, people are making whatever, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year. As the map grows, at a certain point, the company then says, okay, I want to improve my profits. So what does it do? Starts paying the contributors less. Okay, understandably, the contributors will then just basically be like, you guys kind of suck, you know, like,
right.
And so that relationship becomes very, very adversarial. And also the early contributors provide tremendous value to the map, right? Because there are these like early folks who are, you know, taking a risk on this new thing. You know, this may or may not work, right? If it does work, you know, whatever money they made from the system, let's call it like $10,000 or $15,000 a year, that's not, they provided like 20x the value, right? Because they were so
they don't get to lock in the value, right?
Exactly. And so that's really where crypto comes in, which is it solves a whole bunch of these problems where it actually gives ownership to these individuals, especially the early individuals who are taking a risk on the project. And then it says to them, look, either you can keep the token, right, as you collect data and you contribute data into the system. You can either keep you can sell the tokens at some point if you want to, or you can keep the tokens and watch the value increase as, you know, hopefully the token increases. And so in my opinion, it's a much, much, much better model. Why? Because it actually gives ownership to the contributors who are doing the hard work. I think the other thing here to remember is that from a data perspective, you know, look, Web 2.0 really leveraged, like people didn't understand how valuable all this data was, right? I think now most people understand how valuable the data is. You know, you and I walking around with Google Maps or an Android device or some other thing, we, you know, oftentimes unbeknownst to us, we are collecting data on behalf of many of these big tech companies. And I don't know about you, but I don't get a check in the mail, right? And so like, I think people realize that now. And so we are basically establishing and saying, look, everybody knows this data has value, right? And so if you're contributing to something like Hivemapper, that relationship of, you know, here, you're going to get a piece of data that's very, very valuable. And in exchange, you're then going to get a token. It makes that relationship clear, right? There's no ambiguity about like, we're not stealing data. We're not trying to trick you into data, you know, to giving us your data. We're not going to, you know, it's not like, oh yeah, by the way, you'll like get, you know, kudos, or you'll get like a cool free t-shirt or something like that. Like, yeah, sure, we'll do some of those types of things as well. But like fundamentally, you'll get ownership in the map, and that's really what matters.
Okay, I got a ton of questions, but let's make sure we're clear about what this Hivemapper thing is. I just went on this site, I think a couple of days ago, and bought one because I'm always interested in these projects. So I think I've been talking to John. I don't know if you guys have a million customer service reps or just a couple, but
yeah, no, John is great.
Yeah, he's been sending me emails like, hey, this is what to expect. There's not a Hivemapper yet, or not a Hivemapper coverage in San Diego. It's only in these cities. Check this link. And so we're going back and forth. But basically, it's a dashboard camera I put on my car and I drive around. And I'm assuming I leave it on and connect it to my phone, and it sends that data somewhere, and I get paid in tokens for that. Is that kind of how it's supposed to work?
That exactly. Yeah. So you install Dashcam. I'll talk a little bit about like our rollout plans and a bunch of other stuff, but let me first describe it simply such. You buy a Dashcam, they're roughly $200. You put it forward facing in your vehicle or side facing. There's kind of two approved mounts. You have to buy some
like images on how to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so like we kind of walk you through all that stuff, and then you just drive, you know, and the data then gets to Hivemapper. We take that imagery that you're collecting, and then we transform that into map data, right? So
now, is that a ton of data? Because I'm imagining that's either video or a ton of pictures. Is that like a ton of data go through? Okay.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're trying to solve right now, there's a couple of key things in that, you know, what I just described is a really critical flow, but there's still, you know, just to be, you know, super transparent to your audience. a couple of things. One is, like you said, it's not available in all markets yet. So we're kind of taking this approach of let's get it working really, really well in a smaller number of markets, right? Before we go crazy and explode it out to the entire world. So that's step one. So yes, if you're, in Kansas City or Lagos, Nigeria,
or San Diego,
what's that? Or San Diego.
San Diego. You guys,
or San Diego. We're not quite. It's not open yet. In other words, like you can drive around with it, but you're not going to get compensated.
Sure.
Okay, so that's where we're at. So the other thing is, I just want to make this also so clear to the audience, is that right now you're actually going to get paid in cash, right?
Oh, really? So it's not a token to start.
It's not so we're in this process of transitioning over to a token. We're about to publish in the January, probably mid-January timeframe, a really important document that will lay out basically how that protocol is going to work, right?
Okay.
And so it will describe exactly the reward mechanism for earning the tokens. It'll go into a lot of detail on that. We're going to be incredibly transparent about how that's all going to work. And we're also going to publish it to invite feedback, right? So existing contributors, new contributors, people who understand how token economics work and stuff like that, we're going to invite them to provide feedback on it. And so the idea is to then launch a testnet version of it, probably in the, let's call it the April-May timeframe, right?
Okay.
Where we'll then say, okay, you'll still get paid in cash, but at the same time, you'll also see, how many tokens you'll earn as you're driving around. So the name of the Hivemapper token is going to be Honey.
Yeah,
and so as you drive around, you'll be earning this Honey tokens for driving. So that will launch, and then we'll then do a mainnet, and then we'll flip over from a cash-based compensation system to a fully tokenized. Only Honey token is the only mechanism where you'll get rewarded for driving around and providing map coverage.
Okay, I got two questions then. Hang on a sec. So the first one is going to be what I think everyone is going to want to know is how much do you guys think someone is going to make? Or is there a way, how you measuring that? Is someone going to make 10 cents a mile or 10 cents a tile? Or how do you kind of think that might shake out? Or you're just like, we're not sure yet?
Well, the system is definitely being designed such that the early contributors are going to be earning, a significant number of tokens, right? By design, right? So it'll have the Honey token will have a fixed supply, and then there will be like a halving effect. There's a debate right now that's going on as to like whether it's a halving effect, which is 2 years, or whether it's a halving effect, which is dependent upon or triggers based upon how much map actually got covered. So, I mean, that's one of the things that we want the community to kind of give us some feedback. There's some pros and cons to each one and so forth.
Sure. It's always give and take. Yeah.
And so that's step one. The other thing that we're working really, really hard to solve is today, if you were in any of the 9 markets that we're currently active in, right? So if you're driving around Manila, Kuala Lumpur, London, LA, you have this Dashcam. It's called a Blackview Dashcam. It's the only Dashcam that is currently supported on the network.
Yep.
Every 2 or 3 days, as the SD card fills up, you then have to swap the SD card out, upload the video manually.
Okay. Oh, so significant friction right now.
Yeah. So we are working really hard. Our engineering team is working on solving that because, I've done it. It's a hassle. I mean, just like
it's a pain in the butt. So will it eventually look, I mean, I'm just imagining that it's going to transfer to your phone and then your phone's going to offload it. And when you get near a Wi-Fi connection, is that probably how it's going to work, or is there some fancier way of doing it?
No, that's exactly it. So it'll connect to the Hivemapper contributor app, and then it'll move the data over. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the questions and things that you brought up there prior. But so it'll move all that data off. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that we're building is our own Dashcam. So, Helium had the Helium original hotspot. Yeah. And so we'll have a similar kind of idea or concept here, which is the open Dashcam. So the open Dashcam is it looks and smells like every other Dashcam in the world, but the key difference is that it solves that problem, right? It solves the problem of automatically moving the data to the Hivemapper contributor app and then ultimately to Hivemapper. So you can just drive, right?
Yep.
So those two things, moving it over to the Honey token and getting that experience such that it's totally seamless are like the only things that matter right now at Hivemapper. Focus is a great thing.
Yeah, totally. Let's see. So one question that came up is you said that typically the bigger companies pay people in cash, but that doesn't value the initial contributors. But the way you guys are doing it is you're starting off by paying people in cash. How do you kind of balance that stuff out? Is that just like, hey, that's what we have to do to get started? Or is there another thought process behind there where I'm just not seeing it like, oh, it's more valuable to pay in cash for a short period of time? Or how are you thinking through that one?
Well, we started in cash because we wanted to prove to ourselves that we could actually do it, right? And so, I mean, we're only in 9 markets right now. And so, with our balance sheet, we're paying people directly off of our balance sheet. But if we wanted to explode it to the entire world, then you're back into that place where it's like you just got to go raise a ton of capital, right? Because, the world is a very, very big place. Yep. And so, and then you get into all those other issues that I mentioned, right? It becomes very, very adversarial. And so like I've been down that path before, or versions of that path, and I know exactly where that takes us. And so, I became friendly with Amir, CEO of Helium, about a year and a half ago, and showed him what we're building. And then mentioned to him that I said, hey, I've been very inspired by what you guys have done at Helium here. And we kind of had that conversation of, okay, what would it take to kind of move Hivemapper over to a crypto network? And, he was been an amazing kind of partner and friend during that process here.
So until you talked to him, you hadn't been thinking of adding this cryptocurrency aspect to this.
No. So it was about,
so rad.
about 18, 24 months ago. I think they were just in San Francisco. This is Helium, that is. They just, I saw that there were a couple of hotspots in San Francisco, a couple in Austin, and I was really intrigued by it. And I just like read the white paper, dove into everything, bought myself a hotspot. And there was just like a lot of similarities in terms of what they're doing, right? It's like, it's a device. It has to be geographically distributed. You don't need a device, we don't need a dash cam going down Broadway, every 5 minutes, right? They don't want, a hotspot, they don't need 50 of them in the same location. They need, 50 of them spread out. Yeah. So there's a lot of similarities, a map coverage, you can map the world once, but okay, it's out of date, 5 minutes later. So who gives a shit, right? Whereas,
how fresh does data need to be, or is that kind of customer per customer basis? Is there like an industry standard, like anything after 30 days is garbage, or what's it like in the world of mapping?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So it depends on what the use case is, right? So for things like, road navigation, traffic and stuff like that is obviously really fast, right? For if you're doing kind of more city planning, right, or you're doing real estate type of use cases, then it doesn't need to be hourly, days, weeks is fine. So it really depends, right, in terms of what that use case is. And then the other aspect of this is like what part of the world, right? There are some parts of the world. I mean, city of Dallas, a very, very large delivery and transportation logistics company told us that in the city of Dallas, about 30% of all houses, commercial buildings change every single year. So that's a lot, right? A city like Dallas.
Change hands or change?
Something about that location changes that will mess up their map, right? So if they're doing a delivery to a residential location or commercial delivery location, there's something about 20 to 25% of those locations that change.
That's a giant amount of change. I wonder what that is. I wonder if that's just like little number stuff, or if they're moving. It can't be like moving loading docks. That's crazy.
Yeah. So it could be like something as simple as, that road, you can no longer make a left-hand turn on it, right? You can only make a right-hand turn. Somebody put a new house in between, these other two houses. So now the address got split, right? It could be that the delivery door for a hospital shifted from this part to this part, right? Because they're doing
25%. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's a giant market for you guys. You're like, I can give you great information every 3 days.
Exactly. I mean, but in places like Lagos, Nigeria, it's even more than that, right? First of all, the maps there, this guy in Toronto, another kind of transportation logistics company. He's like, "Look, where are you?" He's like, I was like, "Oh, I'm in California, in San Francisco Bay Area." And he's like, "Look, I'm in the Toronto area. The moment you step outside the United States, the degradation that you see in maps, you would not imagine, right?" So he's like, and I was like, "What maps do you use?" He's like, "Well, all the normal ones. I use Google Maps for this. I use this for this, whatever." He went through them. And so I think, our experience with maps, sitting here in California is very, very different from even Toronto, which is, much, much more different than places like Manila or Lagos, Nigeria.
How did you pick the first 9 markets that you're going into? How did you pick Manila or London?
It was strategic. So one is we wanted really, really big cities. So we chose LA and Dallas. And so they're just massive, right? Yep. LA is, huge, and so is Dallas. And so we want to prove to ourselves, we want to understand how many drivers, effectively Dashcam contributors, would we need for an area like LA. And when we say LA, just to be clear, we're not just talking about like the city of LA. We're really talking about the entire metro area, right? So
the giant urban sprawl that goes mountain to mountain and ocean to desert kind of thing.
Exactly. So if you're familiar with LA, I think LA County is rough. I mean, LA County is huge, right?
There's a lot of people there, a lot of roads. How many people do you think you'll need for LA?
We probably thousands. In LA, for like all of LA, thousands of drivers there.
Yeah.
Manila is not that many. It's probably more in probably like 500 to like 1,500, depending upon the frequency that you want. Okay, so we wanted really, really big markets. We also chose a couple of markets in Southeast Asia because we wanted to prove from a cost perspective that it would work there, right?
Yep.
Those markets, I think, are actually more valuable in a lot of ways. Like we can get
from a cost perspective, it's just like it's cheaper to pay the people there. Like the whatever local wage is lower.
That's
is it something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's definitely a big part of it. But the other part of it is that, relative to the competition, Hivemapper can just get better faster there with this approach, right? And like if we want to map, let's say New York or, DC or something like that is very, very well mapped, by the likes of Google, the bar is just a lot higher, right? In terms of us being better than somebody like that.
So the intersection you're looking for is giant city, terrible mapping, lots of people. That's where we want to be.
Exactly. That's well put.
Very cool. So some of these cities are probably not happy to be on that list. Although I would think that London would have great mapping. It doesn't, huh?
No, it for places like London, it was much more about that one actually happened to be like more of a customer, right? Customer saying to us like, "Hey, can you prioritize London because we would like to see what a map of London looks like." Ultimately, we're going to have to do Europe, right? Europe adds another dimension, which is privacy, right?
Oh my God,
very, 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 very privacy sensitive. And so, look, we take that stuff pretty seriously as well. We can get into like how we manage a bunch of that stuff. And so London was kind of like, okay, there's a whole bunch of privacy implications, and we're going to see those crop up in a place like London faster than we're going to see them crop up in places like Africa or South America. And so that's been like a proving ground from a privacy perspective.
Yeah. In general, how does the privacy thing work? I mean, if I'm putting this camera on my car, I guess when I'm home, when I'm not home, what my garage looks like. Like, that seems pretty unprivate.
Yeah, it does. Agreed. So one thing is that we don't want to know a lot about you. In fact, once we move over to crypto, we actually won't need anything about you. So like right now, the only thing that we require is basically an email address, right? That's the only piece of information. In fact, when you actually sign up for Hivemapper, you cannot even choose your own username. We assign you a username, and because we don't want people exposing any sort of private information, right? Like if I were to
help people protect them from themselves. Because I got some 3-word name. It's very like Helium is whatever. Yeah, it's probably I should probably keep it private.
Please keep it private. And so that's really important to us. Is like we say like actually a lot of people like come in, they're like, who is this person? I think I'm in the wrong account. And we're like, no, like
right.
So yeah, we're definitely, so that's one thing is like, we don't want to know anything about you, right, on a personal level. Like we don't want to be able to attach that like, hey, it's Ariel who is this username who's driving around these locations and stuff like that. That's step one that we do. The other aspect is like once we have the actual imagery, then we will mask out people's faces and driver's license and all that kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
So that's the other
plates, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll sorry, I said driver's license. I meant license plates. Yeah. So mask out people's license plates. So that's the other element that we'll do. In some markets in Europe, a contributor will actually have to have a little sign basically saying is like, I'm collecting for a map, right? Like, so
yeah, because that was like, remember when Google did the Google Glasses thing? I remember when I walked into a coffee shop and there's a person with Google Glasses on, and I'm by a long shot no longer a violent dude, and I wanted to go and smack that guy in the face. And it wasn't anything he did. I'm sure he was a nice guy, but just like, dude, you cannot be collecting my information in that way. And I can see that same thing happening, but God, there's a ton of implications of that. People getting targeted because they're collecting information, and they're just like a driver, an Uber driver, doing their thing and trying to make a couple extra bucks.
Yep.
So you guys got a lot on your plate.
Yeah, we do. And so the other aspect of kind of going to crypto is it enables us to, like, if we had to continue paying out cash, then we would have to collect some private information in terms of, what's your PayPal email address, other information. So by going fully crypto, we don't, we can just say, okay, whatever, here's your tokens. If you want to go sell them on Coinbase or Binance once we get listed, that's up to you, right? You go deal with Coinbase and Binance in terms of providing them with your financial information, but that's never tied back to you in terms of, you actually were the one who mapped all of these different locations.
I mean, I guess you could get a real geek who could figure out, like, here's their blockchain address and here's the data they contributed. But I don't know, I'm guessing you guys are doing some security stuff to block that. And that's also a giant pain in the butt and probably not that useful. Okay.
The other thing is, like, we'll make it really easy. And in the app today, even, it's pretty easy to just turn it off, right? So it's like, if you don't want it, you can turn it off. The other thing that's really important here to mention is, like, nobody else. So let's say I'm driving around, I'm collecting data. Nobody else can see that's me, right? Like, you can never go into the map and be like, oh, even like look up by username, like, where are they mapping, right? So if you were to figure out my username, there's no UI that will then enable you to, like, go and see all the different places that I'm mapping. People ask us for that, right? Because they're like, hey, I want to, like, go see, like, where this person's mapping or where that person's mapping. We're like, no, like, don't want that. So, I mean, even if you jump into our Discord channel, there are people who actually take their Hivemapper username and use it in the Hivemapper Discord channel. And we're like, you can do that, but just, like, we would prefer you don't, right? So that
we strongly recommend you don't.
Yeah, we don't recommend that you use your Hivemapper username in these kind of public settings.
Oh, it's interesting. It's fairly different than Helium. I think a lot of us in Helium are kind of learning now, like, maybe we shouldn't have shared our hotspot names because they can't change and they're always tied to, it's all the information's on the blockchain. Yep. So you guys are going to have to handle that from the get-go. Pretty fascinating. So what's going to happen? It's always like the what's in it for me. I'm going to get this camera thing in whatever, a couple days before Christmas, after Christmas. I put it on a car. I'm always curious about stuff. I don't care if I get paid or not for this at the beginning. What should I expect to see? Can I see kind of the data that's coming through on my phone? Or is it more like, hey, you would have earned $2? Or is it just, hey, the thing's on and it's working. Have a nice day. Like, what can I expect?
Yeah. So let's start with if you're mapping in a market that is that's active. Let's start with that, and then we'll talk about your specific situation in terms of mapping in a market that's not yet active. Yeah. So you buy the Dashcam, you get the Dashcam shipped out, comes in a nice box, and then it basically has, like, a set of instructions in terms of how to then hook it up to your car, install, and stuff like that. There's some great videos that John and Brian have created to kind of walk you through that process. Those are wonderful, really help people kind of get familiar with it.
Yeah.
The Dashcam's installed. You then also install the Hivemapper contributor app. So you download that for your iOS device or your Android device. And that will actually show you on the map those areas that need mapping versus those areas that have already been recently mapped.
Oh, cool. So you could go out and, like, just map for a day And be like, yeah, I'm covering ground that hasn't been covered. And this is probably, it's got to be more valuable than ground that has been covered. So you can direct the mapping piece. Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it. So the Hivemapper Contribute app actually helps you. And we highly recommend, I think that would maybe even require, that the Hivemapper Contributor app be running while you're driving, right? It can be running in the background, right? In other words, like it's collecting its own GPS data. We combine the GPS data that you're collecting from your iOS or Android device with the GPS data that's coming off the Dashcam, and that actually improves the accuracy of it. But it's also, there's some value in the actual contributor app in terms of what we just discussed, right? Like being able to help you figure out those areas. You take right now, you still have to upload the video manually. We talked about like how we're going to solve that. But the video makes its way to Hivemapper, and then it shows you, okay, this video, like whatever, it was like 5 minutes long, however minutes long, it mapped X number of tiles, and you got credit for those number of tiles. So if you're driving down a road, you 5 minutes of video, that road need to be mapped because it was required from a freshness perspective. You earned whatever, 500 tiles, boom, in your payouts, you're then going to see that you then made money today, honey tokens in the future for those 500 tiles. And so, the thing that we're working on is helping people see the relationship a little bit more crisply between and also in kind of near real time. Oh, I just drove down Broadway in New York. Well, that area didn't actually earn you a whole bunch of tiles.
Yeah, not valuable.
Boom, like you hook a right to this like little side street, this little alley, right? This little, back warehouse area that needed to be mapped, right? Then you start to see kind of your token rewards increase. So that
makes a ton of sense.
Right?
Yeah. It's like there's just high value areas that you go to, and the first people who do this are going to make the most because they're going to get that. So I guess two questions there. Let's see. The first one is, are those values going to get kind of wiped out by the cash incentives, or is it because the map has to be fresh that those areas will kind of there'll be like another shot at the title to earn tokens off the same high value areas?
Yeah, so it's a good question. That's a really critical question. So we're going to publish a whole bunch related to this exact topic. And so a couple things with tiles. So one is the way so let's say every tile by default, I'm just making these numbers up, so they're just for the purpose of this conversation. But let's say every single tile has one token, right? Reward for it.
Yep.
And so, but then it starts to see that, okay, a lot of people are going down Broadway, but a lot of people are not going down these little side streets and alleys and warehouse locations and whatever.
Sure.
It'll actually move. So that all the tiles on Broadway will start to see their value decrease. Yep. In all those tiles in those back alleyways and whatever, the hospitals and so forth, will see their token rewards increase. And so it'll
totally makes sense. It's like a video game,
move
right?
Around. Yeah. So that's one piece. And then from a freshness perspective, the proposal that we're going to come out with in this document is basically that it'll basically once something gets mapped, it'll start to go back up to 1. So let's say 1 is the default token reward. It'll kind of slowly make its way back up to 1. It won't just go from 0 to 1 overnight or even on a 7-day time frame. So if you map it again tomorrow, it maybe only earn 0.01, right? But if you map it in 3 days, and there will be mechanisms in the protocol for a customer to say, oh, this region, no. Like it's really, to your earlier question, right? It's really, really valuable. So like I'm willing to pay more. And so then those tiles will go from 0 to 1 much more quickly than some other random tile.
How is the customer going to pay? I mean, this is kind of super cool. How is the customer going to pay you guys in cash? They have to, right? Or in whatever fiat.
They pay us in cash, right?
Cool. So you guys this is rad. This is how tokenization is supposed to work, is that you guys are providing a service. You're getting paid in fiat. You're paying out tokens. Those tokens have some value on the open market.
Exactly. So, customer comes to us like, they're like, crypto, yeah, that's cool, whatever. But like, I deal in cash. Like you have to invoice me, right? Yep. And so, so all of, when they buy mapping API credits, they're just paying in cash. And then there's a conversion into tokens because they're burning tokens on the other side, right? And so there's still some
you
details.
guys are handling that. You're just like, hey, if you want, it's transparent to them. They're just like, hey, just map this part of Miami. And you guys are doing all this stuff where it's like, all right, well, that's going to be, 600 tokens and those tokens will be worth this much.
Yeah. So all of that, like the customer just comes and says, I want mapping API requests, I want to buy X amount, right? And then they start to consume them. Mm-hmm. And then like all of the burning of the tokens and then the minting of the new tokens to refresh it, all of that then happens kind of transparently behind the scenes. They don't need to know all the details associated with that.
No, that'll blow people's minds. That's too much. That's awesome.
Like, imagine dealing with some purchasing manager, like explaining that to him or her, like, be like, oh, I don't know. Like they should
Bitcoin. Like, no. I want you to pay in honey.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Okay. And then how open is this whole thing? Or is it kind of like Helium where you guys are just managing the core of it and you're saying, look, we want the community to develop for us? Or is this much more like, hey, we kind of have this expertise that is very specialized and we're going to direct it in general? What does that look like?
Yeah. So the vision and what we're working towards is as follows. So the mapping network will be responsible in moving that more and more towards a decentralized model where the mapping network will be responsible for collecting QA, so quality assurance on that collection, annotation. So there will be an annotation layer that's not live yet. And then actually producing the map or transforming all of that data into maps, right? So that will be the responsibility of this decentralized organization or DAO effectively. Mm-hmm. And all of the token economics associated with how Honey works and stuff like that. That's the DAO. Like, are we there? Today it's still very centralized. It's all managed by Hivemapper Inc. But the clear vision and what we're telling everybody in the community is that will be a DAO that will be managing that process long term. Hivemapper Inc. will be responsible for, so the company Hivemapper will be responsible for designing, building, and servicing all of the APIs, right? So we'll build an API for driving directions, map image API, geocoder API. There's a whole set of them. That will be our responsibility to go and build those and market those and sell those and support them.
Dig it. And then I saw on the site you can map with the Dashcam, kind of cool, or you can map with the drone. Pretty rad.
Yeah.
Tell me about the drone program.
Okay, so the drone program is definitely not, and we tell this to everybody who jumps in there, is definitely not a priority right now. Right. And it's not a priority for us for a couple reasons. One is, as you probably know, there's still a lot of regulation around drones. But even the bigger problem is from a battery perspective, you just cannot fly them very long, right? And so the economics break down, right? If you had a drone that you could fly for like in 2 hours or something like that,
right? Then
the economics make sense, right? Because then it's like, okay, one person has a drone, can take it to X location. I mean, wherever I'm in San Francisco Bay Area, if I could fly a drone for 2 hours, I could map like 50, 60, 70 square kilometers, right?
Right. And so you guys are thinking like, this is more like a drone you can buy off Amazon. Do you think that General Atomics will come in and be like, hey, we're going to throw a couple of Preds at this and you got like 20 hours of wherever you want? Is that something you see in the distant future? Or are you just like, dude, we just got to get this Dashcam thing done first. I'm not super concerned about drones yet.
I think, so I'm more in the latter camp right now, and I have the scars to kind of prove it in terms of the drone stuff. And like, I think it'll get there, right? But I think from a technology perspective, timing is everything, right? And so if we were to sink a lot of resources into drones right now, I just don't think the return would be that significant for us in the short term. Once those two issues, battery technology and regulation, become solved or more solved than they are right now, then absolutely, right?
Yep.
And there's people, by the way, who like started doing drones with us, and they're like, screw this, I'm just going to do the Dashcam stuff, right? It's more cost effective. I earn more. I see the value more, et cetera, et cetera. So I also think that like, once the community starts to grow, then if we wanted to add on, drones, I think that's going to be a lot easier.
Is a user going to be able to see how much they've mapped, not in terms of tokens, but in terms of area covered? Are you going to kind of gamify that? So you've got some user, maybe you don't know their name. It's like whatever, Angry Purple Tiger is the classic helium hotspot name. But you're like, man, Angry Purple Tiger has mapped, 6,000 square miles. They're the global leader. Are you guys doing any gamifying stuff like that?
We do, yeah. We do kind of do a calculation in terms of how many road kilometers you mapped, and then also like how much fresh road kilometers versus remapped of existing. So we have all that data. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're definitely going to put into some cool UI so people can kind of see how they're doing. Another thing that the community has definitely told us is like, look, I drive, from here to there, work wherever I'm going. If you told me like in the app, basically give us driving directions that would optimize my rewards. And if it's like 3 minutes out of the way, then I'm like, cool. Like maybe I have a little bit extra time. I'm willing to drive 3 minutes out of my way if that's going to increase my rewards. So yeah, we'll ultimately kind of do a driving directions thing that will basically optimize your route versus rewards.
Dang. And that has got to be fiendishly complex for you guys to manage, but that's like a fun problem. That's like an engineering thing.
That one's cool. Like I would definitely do that, right? Because I go to the office or whatever. I drive to the office. I'm like, well, I usually do the same route, but if you told me like go, hang a right here, hang a left there, whatever, cool.
Yeah, it could be exciting. See something new.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. There is like mapping is one of those things. Maybe it's a little bit different than helium. I mean, once you set up your helium hotspot, it's awesome. It's cool. You check on it every couple of days, but from a map perspective, as you drive, it's just fun to see, and I think this is kind of the point that you're making. It's fun to see the map grow, right? Like you feel like, it's like you're planting a tree and you're kind of watching the tree grow right in front of you.
Yeah, that's super cool.
And so that's fun. That's like the fun, interesting part of it. And you kind of feel like, especially if you care about your city and your neighborhood and, the area you live in, feeling like, look, there are other people who are using this map, whether it's, local governments or, local first responders or whoever it may be. I'm really providing them with a tremendous amount of value.
Yep. And could I mount the dash cam? Because this is going to happen. Can you put on you put on a motorcycle, on a bicycle, on a skateboard, on anything? Or does it have to be like, nope, this has to be on a 1984 Camry or like whatever it is?
Yeah. So right now it has to be on a vehicle that has at least 3 wheels. And the reason for that is that we need a stable platform, right? A motorcycle is, or a bike is like tilting all the time, left or right.
Okay. Yep.
We'll ultimately be able to solve that problem. And so, but yeah, so right now it has to be on some sort of vehicle that has at least 3 wheels just from a stability perspective. But no, absolutely. Like, a lot of the, I won't break all the news here today. We'll come back and do that. But there's a lot of, beyond roads, right? Like I think we're seeing this across all America right now. And I'm sure, parts of Europe and others, all these like basically different modes of transportation, right? Like whether it be bikes or little scooter bikes or e-bikes or whatever it is, that they're not going down the same roads that you and I drive down, or sometimes even that we walk down, right? There's like dedicated paths now in many cities for them. Those are not very well mapped at all, right? So I think there's like a whole other opportunity there to like map those kinds of locations all over the world.
Interesting. There's like an aerial mapping piece to this that I'm coming back to because you'd said birds. Paragliding is how I got into helium. I'm thinking like, I'll just take one of these things when I fly a paraglider over this local valley and eventually map out that valley. And I guess any small private pilot could also do the same thing. It'd probably have to be some super fancy camera, but
it would
lots of like future radical applications. Okay.
Yep. The one that I'm also really excited about, like in terms of other like additional sensors that we would definitely want to add to the open Dashcam is air quality, right? Like air quality, you and I, we both live in California. Air quality sometimes sucks around here, right? Especially now with forest fires and stuff like that, it's even worse. And so like figuring out where to navigate or where not to navigate to, or, understanding the air quality.
Interesting. And are you going to work with something like Planet Watch for that? Are you guys thinking there's going to be some kind of cross-company collaboration? Or
I'm not familiar with Planet Watch, so I can't speak specifically
to a crypto air quality sensor. So you put a sensor in your house and you get paid in tokens.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah. So ours would be attached to a car, right? Because it's on the open Dashcam. So I'd have to look at like a little bit more carefully in terms of the Planet Watch thing. I was not familiar with them, so I'm curious.
That's a super cool. Yeah. dig. And the other thing is, I think I asked this and I just forgot it, is where are you guys going to store the data? Is it going to be the same model that you came from before where the customer owns it? Or is it going to be that somehow I own the data? I can't imagine that as a user or a mapper, or where does it live?
Yeah, so the data will be owned by the mapping network, by the DAO. Okay, so you can use the imagery that you're collecting, and if you wanted to, you could use it for your own purposes, right? Like you can go and if you captured a beautiful shot of whatever, the Eiffel Tower, whatever it is, and you want to go sell that, you can go sell that, right? Or if you saw an accident, yeah. So you
can see your stuff. You can see what you've mapped.
Yeah, you can see so you'll be able to see all the imagery, right? So you can pull that image of the Eiffel Tower that as you were driving, you saw something incredible, whatever it may be, and you can turn around and sell that, right? Because
how big is the Dashcam industry?
There's probably, I haven't checked recently, but there's about 300 to 400 million deployed Dashcams. Throughout a lot of Russia and Eastern Europe, it's every other person has them, right? It's like a big security insurance type of thing in those parts of the world.
Interesting. So are you guys looking at that, or I'm just stumbling around here in the dark? That sounds like a cool idea.
Yeah. I mean, historically the Dashcam, we don't, most Dashcams, when you buy them, obviously they work during the day and the night, as they should. When you're collecting at night, we don't care. We don't use that data, right? We can't see anything. There's nothing valuable from a map perspective when you're driving around at night. You can continue to record, use that data for your own purposes. If you get into an accident in the middle of the night or whatever it is, you can still use that imagery that's collected and you'll have access to that. But Hivemapper, that data will not make its way into Hivemapper ultimately.
Okay, so nighttime data won't make it into Hivemapper. So
yeah.
The company, I guess the DAO will store it, but it's not available to be used.
We would even want to cut it off before that. So we're designing it such that that data never actually makes it off the open Dashcam, right? So if you're collecting at night, if you wanted to, you can move it over into your contributor app, but it will actually never get uploaded to Hivemapper, right? Because you were asking before in terms of the costs.
Yep.
Managing the costs, a lot of that has to do with being very, very smart about what you ultimately actually upload to Hivemapper versus what you process, on your device, etc. Right. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes into that. Because otherwise, there'd be a lot of redundant data or a lot of data that's captured at night that's useless. So there's a whole bunch of kind of logic and work that goes into that.
Dang, so you guys got at least two big businesses. One is the Dashcam business, because why would you buy a Dashcam that doesn't pay you? Once you guys come online.
Yeah.
There's not a great reason. I mean, maybe there's some super fancy Dashcam, but I'm sure you guys can compete on that. And then the second part is selling the map data. Is what else? We'll finish up here because I know we're closing in on time.
Yeah. We care much more about the latter, to be clear.
About the map data,
yeah, about the map data. Dashcam, I think is it's a hardware business, a different business model than ours. If we're the open Dashcam is we're not going to make a profit on it, right? We're just going to
but there's a huge incentive for people to buy the Dashcam, whether they get it from you or not, and to put it on Hivemapper. There's
yes.
Yeah, that's super cool. What's the other? What is another thing, if there's any, that people find really surprising about this? Obviously, there's a couple things I was I hadn't thought of that. What else do you find when you're talking to people who have just heard of Hivemapper, where they're like, dude, I had not thought of that at all. That's rad.
So I think there's a couple things. One is there's a strong desire to figure out how NFTs figure out how they integrate into what we're doing, right? Okay. So for example, if you're an artist or you're a 3D modeler or whatever it is, and you want to participate in Hivemapper, we get a lot of people who are like, oh, wow, I can, let's just take the Transamerica building in San Francisco, right? I want to create a beautiful 3D model of that, plus the park. I want to make that incredibly beautiful.
Yep.
And so that to me is really interesting, because it's this marriage between utility, right? Maps are ultimately really, really useful, plus art, right?
Yep.
And how those two things come together, where that artist can turn that thing into an NFT, but also it has underlying utility in the map, right? Like if you think about real estate developers, urban planners and stuff like that, right? If you go onto like all their different documentations and project boards and stuff like that, that's a lot of what they're doing, right? Is like they're trying to like, okay, what does it look like right now? How could I like reformulate it and look like this, whatever it is? And this is like one little tiny example, but I think what it says to us is like, wait, there's this opportunity where people who are artists who are participating in Hivemapper can actually start to like model out this world based upon all this imagery that's coming in. And so I think that's go ahead.
Does the imagery become the NFT? Like you say like, hey, we'll sell, I don't know, this image of the building from 360 degrees. Like I'm missing that connection.
Sure. So I think there's two ways, and this is like still kind of being discussed in terms of how it works. There's one, which is, look, you then annotated the map, right? Effectively, when I say annotated, I'm like very broadly describing annotation. You're designing, right, or bringing your artistic and creativity into this specific part of the world or this specific part of the map, right? And so that as people then consume that map, right, which is incredible for that specific area, you're then earning the honey token rewards like you would if you were the Dashcam contributor or something like that.
How would I consume the map in that way? Like I'm just thinking of going from, my house to my work. And let's say there's, on the way is the Statue of Liberty. Like how would I why would I get it?
So you may not care about it, but that's where like a real estate developer would potentially care about like something that is, incredibly realistic looking, right? They want to move around it. Yeah. So a real estate developer, that's we deal with a bunch of commercial real estate companies and stuff like that. And, it's pretty amazing. Like these guys and gals, they spend a ridiculous amount of time in things like Google Street View and Google Earth. Like literally you go to their offices, they all have Google Earth up and Google Street View, and they're all like looking around and stuff like that. And they're just consuming a tremendous amount. And so, you do have an end customer there, right? And so this idea, so that's like one in terms of the consumption, the utility aspect of it.
Yep.
But then you also, I would argue, like you have a beautiful piece of art. I don't know, like you go into a lot of people's houses, they have beautiful artistic renderings of different locations around the world, right? Or even maps hanging on their walls. And so I think there's another aspect of that, which is art, which is like, okay, how does that make its way into the NFT world? So we're still trying to kind of wrap our heads around this, but like that's one thing that the community comes to us is like, hey, look, how can I participate and get my art and my NFTs into this world? So that's kind of something that I think is exciting to me because I love art and I love, that aspect of it as well, beyond just the pure utility and the financials aspect of it.
That's right. Yeah. It's always a cool thing to make the world a more beautiful place or to enable that. So,
yeah.
Okay. So there's an NFT aspect to that kind of to be determined, but there's something in this thing of like, hey, a map in and of itself is beautiful, or the data in that map can be made more than just utility.
Exactly.
Made into more just utility. Okay. Yeah. Very cool. All right. Yep. Totally surprising. Anything else that you're like, oh yeah, people don't ever see this, but I think this is a cool part of the project. I mean, you probably think everything is so.
Yeah. I think we hit on like most of like the big things that are like super fascinating. I think a lot of people come to us and they're like, what else can you do with this, right? Like what other sensors can you put on the open Dashcam that makes that collection experience like that much more valuable? Because once you have the real hard work is, or hard, I don't know, hard, but it's like there's friction, right? You got to go out and buy a Dashcam, you got to install the Dashcam, you got to make sure it's installed properly. So like, let's just call that the friction part of the experience. But once thing is there, what other sensors can it be collecting, or what other sensors can you put on the open Dashcam such that you're just collecting a lot more valuable data as you go. And so that's something that we think a lot about, and that I'm very excited by.
Dig it. Totally dig it. Are you guys worried about gaming stuff at all? I don't see how things can get gamed, but I don't really think like a gamer in the sense of cheating. Is it going to be an easy way for someone to just magically run their car down some street that they're not actually on and provide some kind of BS data, maybe like pulling from Google Street? So they're like, yeah, I already picked this up. Or,
yeah. No, this is definitely like, especially kind of with AI and stuff like that, this is definitely an area of concern, right? Because ultimately, if somebody's relying on this data, they need to know that it was collected where it said it was collected, right? Mm-hmm. And that it's actually authentic, right? Yep. And yes, there will absolutely be incentives for people to manipulate that.
Yep.
And so this is kind of where Amir and the Helium team have been really helpful, right? Because they fought a lot of these battles in terms of just like, how do you protect the network and how do you protect the network at various layers and stuff like that? So one of the things that we will have is a reputation score. So let's say everybody starts off with, a blank slate, right? And then as you demonstrate that you're producing high quality data, your reputation score goes up. If if there's a whole bunch of quality signals, and if some of those quality signals come out negative, then your reputation score starts to take a hit, right?
Right, and you earn less for that.
Yeah. And so the way it's actually really interesting. The way that it's being designed is that, okay, let's say I mapped 100 tiles, right? And if I had a really, really good reputation score, let's just, for the purpose of this conversation, let's say it was one honey token per tile. So I earned 100. I earned 100 tokens. Yep. So if I have a stellar reputation score, then I would likely get all 100 tokens. But if I had a below average, then there would be a QA tax, right? Because it has to go through additional kind of QA layers. And the QA person would then receive some of that 100 tokens, right? So if I was the one with the poor reputation score, I earn quote unquote 100 tokens. I'm doing little air quotes here. I initially got allocated 100 tokens, but because I had a poor reputation score, you as the QA person would get 15% of those because you had to do QA on my collection.
And on the QA side, that would be me also driving that same road, or would it be something else?
It'd be something else. It'd be like somebody like who sits behind a computer and is like looking at the imageries that you collected and saying like thumbs up or thumbs down or, that kind of thing.
Okay. So you don't even have to drive to earn, and you would get paid in tokens.
Exactly.
Oh, that's pretty cool. A whole little ecosystem. Okay.
Yeah. So
dig it, dude. Well,
yeah.
Good. Yeah.
No, that's like it encourages people basically being like, hey, look, you could have earned all 100 tokens, but like, because, you got dinged here or whatever, you have a poor reputation, like we had to like do this tax and whatever. So it kind of encourages people to like, get their reputation score up.
To do the right thing.
Yeah.
Dig it, man. All right. And it's hivemappers.com. Is that what you guys doing?
Hivemapper.com. No S.
No S. Okay.
You
don't need those S's, just one of them.
Yeah. Just one, just one, okay. one big one. So this has been a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, really appreciate your time. Super excited to see where this goes. I'm excited to get my Dashcam in the mail, and even if it's for free, I will contribute to this project. This sounds awesome. I'm totally on board.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Right on. Thank you.